A hidden affair and a fatal choice. The night she chose revenge. Criminal story. Martha had always prided herself on the life she and Ryan had built together. From the outside, their marriage appeared perfect, a shining example of commitment, stability, and love. They had met in college, both driven, ambitious individuals with clear goals for the future. Ryan had been the charming and confident type, always the center of attention, while Martha had been more reserved, a thinker who observed the world quietly and intently. They were an unlikely match in many ways, yet they complemented each other perfectly. Before we can continue, if you love crime stories, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. In the early days of their relationship, Ryan had been her rock. He had a way of making her feel like the center of his universe, something that made her feel valued in a world that often seemed indifferent. After they graduated, they both found jobs in their respective fields, Ryan in corporate finance, Martha as a communications strategist. Their lives seemed to glide forward effortlessly as they climbed the ladder of success. They bought a beautiful house on the outskirts of town, a spacious two-story home with a garden that Martha adored, where she spent her weekends planting flowers and growing herbs. The house was their sanctuary, a symbol of all they had worked for together. The first cracks appeared quietly, imperceptibly, like the faintest of ripples on a calm pond. Martha had always been a meticulous person, attuned to the smallest details. At first, the changes in Ryan were subtle enough to ignore. He worked late more often, then came home later, sometimes not until well after dinner. He would tell her it was the pressure of his job, the deadlines, the meetings, the corporate travel, but Martha had always known him as someone who could compartmentalize his work life. It didn't add up. The distance between them started to grow, not in giant leaps, but in small steps. Martha noticed Ryan no longer seemed as interested in the quiet evenings they used to share, reading together by the fire, or making dinner for the two of them. Instead, he would come home tired, distracted, and sometimes not even talk to her at all. He would retreat into his study or head out to the gym for long workouts. It seemed to Martha like he was avoiding her, though, of course, she never dared ask. But the changes weren't just in Ryan. She, too, had begun to feel a shift. Perhaps it was age, or perhaps the subtle erosion of their intimacy, but Martha had started to feel restless, like she was losing herself in the routines of everyday life. She had always been a driven woman, but now, she felt as though she was drifting in a sea of monotony, her sense of purpose dissolving into the ether. She wondered sometimes if Ryan noticed it. Did he see the same quiet loneliness creeping into her life that she saw in his? Did he understand how much she longed for the closeness they once shared? Yet, despite these feelings, she pushed them aside. She loved him deeply, and she told herself that all relationships went through phases, that the ebb and flow of life could sometimes lead to a lull. They were both busy, and stress could change a person's demeanor. She kept her doubts buried beneath the surface, just as she had buried many of her own needs. However, Martha's suspicions were further fueled by small, fleeting moments that didn't add up. She would come home early from work one afternoon, only to find Ryan's car gone, though he had said he would be working late. Or she would find that his phone, which was usually left on the kitchen counter, was suddenly missing when she went to make dinner. When he came home, he had a strange look in his eye, a look that felt too practiced to be innocent. It was a guarded expression, one she had never seen before, as if he were hiding something from her. But when she asked him directly, he would dismiss her with a smile and a shrug. "Work stuff," he would say, as though that explanation should be enough. For a while, it was enough for her. But there was always that lingering doubt, that quiet voice in her head whispering, "Something's not right." It was the moments when Ryan would slip into his own world, locking himself in the bathroom with his phone for long periods, or when he would take longer to respond to texts or phone calls. He had always been communicative, always checking in throughout the day, even if it was just a simple, "How's your day going?" Now, there were days when his replies came hours late, or sometimes not at all. The unease settled into her chest like a weight, but Martha refused to confront it. She didn't want to. She didn't want to acknowledge that maybe, Just maybe, Ryan wasn't the man she had thought him to be. But there it was, her growing fear. The small, telling signs began to accumulate. His lack of affection, his late nights at work, his phone, always tucked away and never left unattended. She was living in a quiet state of suspicion, but she had nothing concrete, nothing she could point to and say, "This is it." Still, the feeling gnawed at her. It wasn't just intuition. It was a sense that something had changed between them, and Martha couldn't escape the growing suspicion that it was more than just the natural course of a long-term relationship. Something deeper, more sinister, was at play. Then came the night she finally decided to act on her suspicions. It had been a week like any other. Ryan had worked late most nights, coming home tired and barely able to string together coherent conversation. Martha had retreated into her own world, feeling increasingly isolated. She spent the evening reading a book in the living room, the soft light of the table lamp casting gentle shadows across the room. She was half watching a movie when she heard the familiar sound of Ryan's car pulling into the driveway. He was home earlier than usual, perhaps just in time for dinner. Martha's stomach fluttered with an odd sense of hope. Maybe he was beginning to realize how much she missed him, how much she longed for them to reconnect. But when Ryan came through the door, his face immediately registered an expression of guilt. He barely looked at her, as if ashamed of something, though she couldn't quite place why. "Hi," he said flatly, and he walked past her without so much as a kiss or a hug. There was no warmth in his voice, no smile. She felt a chill in the air, and before she could even say anything, he was already retreating to his study. She was left standing in the hallway, watching his back as he disappeared down the corridor. A strange, cold knot settled in her stomach, and the familiar feelings of doubt flooded her senses. She knew something was off, and for the first time in a long while, Martha realized she couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed answers. It wasn't like her to snoop, to invade someone's privacy. She had always prided herself on the trust they had built over the years. But tonight, that trust felt like a fragile illusion, one that had cracked and splintered over time. Martha didn't know what had changed within her, but she couldn't shake the thought that if she didn't find out the truth now, it might be too late. Ryan had left his phone on the kitchen counter again, as he always did when he entered the house. He was deep in his study, and the moment seemed ripe for action. Her hand hesitated just above the device, her fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, she almost talked herself out of it. But the urge to know the truth was overwhelming. She picked it up, her heart racing as she unlocked the screen with the code he had never bothered to change. Martha had always trusted him, but now, trust seemed like a distant memory. The first message she opened shattered her reality. There, in plain sight, was a conversation between Ryan and a woman named Erica. They had been communicating for months, perhaps longer. The words were casual at first, almost like friendly banter, but as she scrolled down, the tone shifted. The messages were filled with flirtations, with private jokes, with references to late-night meetings and secret rendezvous. The intimate nature of the exchanges left Martha breathless. She couldn't believe it. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though someone had reached inside and twisted her heart. The words blurred before her eyes, but she couldn't look away. She read it all. Ryan had been having an affair. And in that moment, as she stared at the screen, the truth settled like a stone in her stomach. The life she had known, the love she had thought was unwavering, had all been a lie. Martha sat there for a long time, the phone still in her trembling hands, trying to process the enormity of what she had just uncovered. The anger bubbled up slowly, seeping into her veins, until it burned like fire. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she could confront him, if she even wanted to hear the lies he would surely offer. But one thing was certain. Her life, their life, had been irrevocably changed. Martha sat in the living room, still holding Ryan's phone in her hands, her mind spinning in a chaotic whirlwind. The words on the screen continued to echo in her mind, like an unwanted song she couldn't shake. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. Let's make it happen soon." It was an exchange so intimate, so personal, that it made her skin crawl. Ryan, The man she had loved and trusted for over a decade was not the person she thought he was. Everything, the house they built together, the laughter they shared, the moments of quiet joy in each other's company, had been a facade, a mask he had worn so well. Even she had believed it. But now, the mask had slipped, and the truth was staring her in the face. Martha's hands trembled as she scrolled further, reading message after message, each one a knife twisting deeper into her heart. She couldn't stop herself. Every new revelation was like a new wound, and yet, she couldn't pull away. Erica. The name felt foreign in her mouth, though she had heard it before. Ryan had mentioned her occasionally, always in the context of work, of course. Erica's handling the quarterly report, or Erica's got a great idea for the next campaign. Never anything out of the ordinary, never anything to suggest the betrayal that was unfolding before her now. The hurt she felt wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the overwhelming realization that she had been blind, that she had allowed herself to be deceived for so long. Martha prided herself on her intuition, on the quiet strength she carried with her through life. She had always trusted her gut, but now she wondered if it had failed her all these years. Or worse, had she been afraid to listen? Deep down, had she known and simply refused to acknowledge it? Her thoughts spiraled into guilt, into self-doubt. Could she have prevented this? Could she have saved them before it had all fallen apart? As the minutes ticked by, the gravity of the situation began to settle in. She had found the proof, the concrete evidence of Ryan's infidelity. But what was she supposed to do with it now? What could she possibly say to him that would make sense of this? What could she say that would explain the crushing weight in her chest, the sense of betrayal that had fractured the very foundation of their relationship? She couldn't think clearly anymore. Her mind was a tangled mess of emotions, anger, hurt, confusion. But beneath all of it, something else was beginning to rise within her. Something darker, something more powerful than the devastation she felt. It was a longing for something she had never dared acknowledge before. Justice. Revenge. A desire to make him feel the same pain she was feeling. She had always been the calm one, the rational one, the one who played by the rules. But now, she was beginning to realize that the rules had never worked in her favor. Ryan had broken them, over and over again. And now, it was her turn to take control. As she sat there, staring at the glowing screen of his phone, Martha's mind raced. What did she want? She had thought she wanted the perfect marriage, the stable life they had promised each other. But now, in this moment of brutal clarity, Martha realized something even more fundamental. She wanted respect. She wanted to be seen, to be valued as more than just Ryan's wife, his quiet partner in the background. She had poured so much of herself into their marriage, into their shared life, and yet he had treated her like she was invisible. She wanted him to feel what she felt now, this aching emptiness, this cold betrayal. The thought of confronting Ryan face to face seemed impossible. She knew he would deny everything, downplay it, or try to turn the blame on her. She had seen it in his eyes too many times. The way he dismissed her concerns, the way he always managed to make her feel like she was overreacting, like she was the one with the problem. But this time, she couldn't let him manipulate the situation. This time, there would be no excuses. There would be no pretending it didn't matter.
She was done with that.
Martha set the phone down on the coffee table, the weight of it somehow grounding her. She needed to act, to do something. But what? What was she supposed to do with this revelation? Was she supposed to simply confront him? Ask him why? She knew what the answer would be. He would deny it. He would lie, try to explain it away, and she would be left with nothing but her own pain and fury. The thought of Ryan sitting across from her, his charming smile plastered on his face, telling her it was all a misunderstanding, made her stomach churn.
No.
This wasn't going to be some emotional discussion where they'd work things out. This wasn't about healing their marriage. This was about taking control of a situation where she had been powerless for far too long. For a moment, Martha considered leaving. She could take the phone, pack a bag, and leave him. She had money saved up, a bank account of her own, though she had never truly thought of using it until now. She could disappear, leave Ryan and Erica to their tangled mess, and start fresh. But the thought of that, of walking away from everything she had known, everything she had built, felt hollow. She wanted something more than escape. She didn't just want to leave. She wanted closure. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to make sure Ryan understood the full extent of what he had done. Leaving him wasn't enough. She needed more than just an end. She needed justice. It was then that the idea took root in her mind. Quiet, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily until it consumed her. She wasn't just going to confront Ryan. She wasn't going to just yell at him or ask him why. No, she was going to make him face the consequences of his actions. She was going to confront both Ryan and Erica together. She had seen them before, out in public, always so casual with each other, so comfortable in their shared world. They acted as though no one could see through their charade. But Martha had seen enough to know that something more than friendship was going on between them. She had watched them during work events, seen the way they would exchange lingering glances, the way Erica's hand would casually brush against Ryan's arm, the intimacy between them that was masked by pleasantries and polite conversations. She could never quite place her finger on it, but now it was clear. The affair had been going on for months, perhaps longer, and she had been living in the dark, oblivious to the life they had built behind her back. It was strange, in a way. For all the pain she felt, there was something almost surreal about the entire situation. She had spent so much of her life building a future with Ryan, a life that felt like it was set in stone. And yet, here she was, standing on the edge of everything she had known, unsure of what was real anymore. The thought of what she might do next felt both foreign and inevitable. It was a strange mixture of dread and determination, like standing on the precipice of something she couldn't walk away from. Martha didn't just want answers. She wanted to look them both in the eye and make them understand what they had done to her. What Ryan had done to her. The pain she felt wasn't just about the affair. It was about how easily he had discarded her, how little he seemed to care for the life they had built. And it was about the years she had wasted in a marriage that, in the end, had been nothing but a lie. The clock on the wall ticked away, the minutes slipping by as Martha weighed her options. She wasn't going to let Ryan get away with this. She wasn't going to let him slide by with an apology or a hollow explanation. It was time for action. She had spent so much of her life being the supportive wife, the one who always held things together, who played the role she was expected to play. But now, she had to be something else. She had to take control of her own story. She had to make sure Ryan knew the pain he had caused, that Erica understood the destruction she had helped create. Her decision was final. That night, she would confront them both. She would show them that there was a price to be paid for betrayal, and she would make sure they never forgot it. The thought of doing it filled her with a mixture of dread and anticipation. But there was no turning back now. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her own power, about proving to herself that she wasn't the weak, submissive woman she had been for years. She was strong, and she was capable of taking back everything she had lost. As the night stretched on, Martha's resolve grew stronger. She would do it. She would face them both, and she would make sure they knew exactly what they had cost her. Martha had never imagined herself in a situation like this. Confronting Ryan had always seemed like a distant, almost unthinkable scenario. After all, their life together had been built on mutual respect, or so she thought. But now, everything she had believed in felt like a lie, a carefully constructed illusion that had been shattered in one cruel instant. And yet, as she sat in the quiet of their home, the decision had already been made. She would confront him. She would face him, and she would face Erica as well. There would be no more running from the truth, no more pretending that everything was fine when it was clear it was not. The hours that passed before that night felt like an eternity. Martha moved around the house mechanically, not fully aware of what she was doing. She cleaned the kitchen, organized the papers on the desk in the study, made the bed, even though she knew she wouldn't be sleeping in it that night. Her body moved through the motions of daily life, but her mind was elsewhere. It kept replaying the moment she had discovered the truth, over and over again. Each time, the pain hit like a wave, sharp and suffocating. But now, that pain was turning into something else, something darker, more insistent. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The need for justice, for answers, had grown into an urgent desire for action. Martha knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about confronting Ryan with the affair, it was about making him feel what she had felt. She needed to make him understand the depth of the betrayal, the gravity of what he had done. And she needed to make sure that Erica, the woman who had been an active participant in this deceit, understood that there were consequences to actions like theirs. There was no longer any room for empathy, no room for mercy. Not when everything she had built was being torn apart. The most difficult part of her plan wasn't the confrontation itself. It was the decision to follow through with it. Martha had never been a confrontational person. She had always been the type to keep her emotions in check, to avoid drama and escalation. She believed in resolution, in working things out quietly and respectfully. But this was different. Ryan's betrayal wasn't something that could be resolved with calm words or heartfelt pleas. It was a rupture, something that couldn't be undone. She was no longer the woman who had stood by his side, trusting him. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who was willing to take risks, to break the rules, to force the truth to the surface. By the time the sun set that evening, Martha was already dressed, her clothes carefully chosen not for their comfort, but for their purpose. She had chosen a pair of dark jeans and a black top, simple but purposeful. There was something about the color black that made her feel detached, as though she could step outside herself, outside her normal life, and become someone else. Someone who didn't care about the consequences, someone who could look her husband and his lover in the eyes and make them see her as she truly was, strong, unyielding, and determined. She checked her phone again. The last message from Ryan had been sent an hour ago, something about staying late at the office. The text was vague and almost offensive in its simplicity. He was avoiding her, she could feel it. She had no doubt that Ryan knew something was off, that he sensed her growing distance. But what he didn't know was that tonight would be the night everything came to a head. No more avoiding. No more excuses. It was strange, the way her emotions shifted between calm detachment and seething anger. One moment, she was poised and controlled, plotting her every move as if she were a chess player preparing to make her final checkmate. The next, the rage would bubble to the surface, a hot, jagged edge of fury that threatened to consume her. But she pushed it down. Tonight wasn't about rage, it was about strategy. It was about making them see her, making them understand the extent of their betrayal. She took a deep breath as she stood by the door, looking out at the quiet street. It was a typical evening, neighbors going about their business, cars pulling into driveways, the sound of children laughing in the distance. But for Martha, everything felt different now. She wasn't just a woman going about her life. She was a woman preparing to step into an unfamiliar world, a world of confrontation, of darkness, of consequences. She had no idea what would happen once she left the house, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. She had made her decision. The need for closure, for answers, was more pressing than any doubt that lingered in her mind. She stepped into the night, the cold air hitting her face like a slap. It was a long drive, but Martha didn't mind. The further she got from her home, the more focused she became. It was as though each mile took her further away from the woman she had been and closer to the one she was becoming, a woman who no longer sought forgiveness or understanding, but something far more powerful: control. As she drove, Martha's mind began to race with 1,000 thoughts. How would Ryan react when he saw her? Would he be surprised, scared, guilty? Would he try to talk her out of it, to explain things away with his usual charm and polished lies? She couldn't afford to let him do that. She had to be firm, unyielding. She would not allow him to manipulate her again. And what about Erica? The thought of the woman who had been a part of her husband's life for months, maybe years, filled Martha with a strange mixture of hatred and pity. She had never met Erica before, but she had seen her at company events, seen how she lingered around Ryan, how they exchanged knowing glances when they thought no one was watching. The betrayal of their relationship had been one thing, but the fact that Erica had been complicit in it, that she had played a role in tearing apart Martha's life, felt like a betrayal of its own. She was an accomplice in this crime of the heart, and Martha would make sure she understood that. The closer Martha got to the location she had in mind, the more her heart pounded. She had been here before. This was the upscale restaurant where Ryan and Erica had frequently been seen dining together. It was a well-known spot in the city, a place where business deals were made, where people pretended to be someone they were not. It was the perfect place for an affair, discreet enough to keep things hidden, but public enough to be easily accessible. The irony wasn't lost on her. Ryan and Erica had taken great care to keep their secret safe, but tonight, all of that would change. She parked across the street from the restaurant and sat there for a moment, staring at the building. She could see through the large windows. Ryan and Erica were there, sitting at a table in the back, laughing. It was an easy, relaxed conversation. Too comfortable, too intimate. Martha's stomach twisted with anger as she watched them, their closeness, their ease with each other. She wanted to scream, to rush in and pull Ryan away from her, to make him see the damage he had done. But she held herself back. Tonight wasn't about emotions. It was about power. For a moment, she sat in the car, watching them as they dined together. Then, with a deep breath, she grabbed her purse and stepped out into the night. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she walked toward the entrance, each step bringing her closer to the confrontation that had been brewing for days. She didn't know what would happen once she entered that restaurant. She didn't know how Ryan would react, or how Erica would respond. But in that moment, she didn't care. The woman who had walked into the night just hours ago was no longer the same person who had sat at home, quietly broken and uncertain. This was the new Martha, the one who had been pushed to the edge, the one who had nothing left to lose. Tonight, everything would change. The bell above the restaurant door rang as Martha stepped into the warm, dimly lit space, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The sound seemed louder than usual, a jarring note in the otherwise hushed ambience of the upscale restaurant. She had thought she might feel a surge of adrenaline, a rush of power as she entered this unfamiliar world, the world where her marriage had been destroyed and her husband had found solace in another woman. But the truth was more complicated than that. There was no rush. Instead, there was only a quiet, gnawing dread that seemed to coil in her stomach, as though the gravity of what she was about to do was settling in. Martha paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room quickly. It was just as she had imagined. White linen tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and the soft murmur of conversations mixing with the clink of silverware against fine china. It was a space of polished civility, of pretense. And there, in the far corner, was Ryan, his broad shoulders and well-groomed hair unmistakable, sitting across from Erica, the woman who had betrayed her trust, the woman who had willingly stepped into the vacuum of her marriage. For a moment, everything around Martha seemed to blur. The low hum of conversation faded as her eyes locked onto the couple. Ryan was laughing and Erica was leaning in, eyes sparkling with the kind of intimacy that felt like a punch to the gut. They had clearly grown comfortable in their secret, their world of stolen moments and whispered promises. As Martha watched them, it felt as though the weight of all the years of her marriage was pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. How many times had she sat across from Ryan, sharing a meal just like this, blissfully unaware of the lies that lay beneath the surface? The contrast between then and now was unbearable. Forcing herself to breathe, Martha took a few slow, deliberate steps toward the back of the restaurant. Her heart was racing, her palms damp with sweat, but she refused to falter. No matter how much the raw anger churned within her, no matter how much the fear threatened to overtake her, she had a singular purpose now. She had to see this through. She had to confront them both. This wasn't just about asking questions, it was about demanding answers. It was about taking control of her story. When she was a few steps away, she paused again. Her nerves flared, a tightness building in her chest. What was she even doing here? Was she really ready for this? A part of her wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of her car, and never look back. The doubts surged like a tidal wave. What if Ryan denied it all? What if he blamed her for not seeing it sooner? For not being enough? Or worse, what if he was so far removed from their life together that he didn't even care? The thought was unbearable. But then, something shifted within her. Martha had spent so much of her life trying to be what Ryan needed her to be, always the supportive wife, always the one who kept their world together, even when it was falling apart at the seams.
But not anymore.
This was her moment. This was her reckoning. It didn't matter how Ryan would react. It didn't matter how Erica would respond. What mattered was that Martha had taken control. She was no longer waiting for permission to feel her pain or for validation from anyone else. She steadied herself and walked the final few steps to their table. Ryan and Erica hadn't noticed her yet. They were caught up in their conversation, caught up in the world they had created. But Martha wasn't there to make an entrance with a dramatic outburst or a tearful plea. She had come to take them by surprise, to shatter their illusion of control. She was done with subtlety, done with waiting for answers. She was here, and she wasn't leaving until they knew exactly what they had done to her. "Ryan," she said, her voice low, steady. Ryan looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing in disbelief as he recognized her. He blinked, as if unsure whether he was seeing things clearly. Erica followed his gaze, her expression flickering for just a moment before it hardened into something almost imperceptible, like a mask slipping back into place. The tension in the air was immediate, thick and suffocating. The kind of silence that feels louder than any argument, louder than any words could ever be. "Martha," Ryan said, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. He stood up quickly, clearly trying to mask the shock, but his attempt was too late. The damage had already been done. His eyes flicked briefly toward Erica, who was now sitting upright, her face a picture of feigned innocence. It didn't take long for Martha to realize that Erica knew exactly what was coming. The woman wasn't worried. She wasn't apologetic. She was ready for this moment, just as Ryan had been ready for the affair. Martha's stomach twisted as she stared at Ryan, at the man she had once known so intimately, so deeply. The man she had given her life to. And yet, standing before him now, she felt like a stranger. The connection they had once shared seemed like a distant memory, a fleeting thing she could hardly reach. This man before her was a stranger, a betrayer, a liar. "I know about you and Erica," Martha said, her voice steady but hard. The words hung in the air between them, an accusation that was both painful and empowering. "I know everything." Ryan's eyes widened, and for a brief second, a flicker of guilt flashed across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of indifference. He turned to Erica for a brief moment, his hand almost instinctively reaching out to hers. It was subtle, but Martha saw it, saw the way they exchanged some silent, private communication. Erica's lips curled into a tight, barely perceptible smile. Martha felt a surge of anger rising within her, but she fought it down. Now was not the time to lose control. Now was the time to hold steady, to demand that they look at her, see her, acknowledge the pain they had caused. She had no time for pleasantries, for denial. She was beyond that. "Don't pretend you didn't know," Martha said, her voice firm now, unyielding. "I've seen the messages. I've seen everything. The late nights, the stolen texts, the lies. You're not fooling me anymore." She could feel the venom in her words, the bitterness that had been boiling inside her for so long, but it didn't feel like rage. It felt like a release. Like the shackles she had been wearing for years were falling away, one word at a time. Ryan looked at her, the expression on his face now a mixture of anger and defensiveness. "Martha, you don't understand." He stopped mid-sentence, his hand gripping the edge of the table, his face flushed. He didn't have the words to justify what he had done. No excuses would suffice. He had betrayed her. There was no talking his way out of it. "Don't try to explain," Martha interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "I've heard enough lies. I don't need your explanations, Ryan. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer, and I'm done with it. I want you to look at me and realize that everything we had, everything we built, means nothing to you. Not anymore. Ryan's face twisted, and for a moment, Martha saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before: fear. The fear of being exposed, of losing control. But it was too late for him to take it back. The words had been spoken. The truth had been laid bare. There was no going back to the way things had been before. Erica, for her part, had been quiet up until now, her face a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, but Martha wasn't having it. She turned to her next. "And you," Martha said, her voice low but steady, "you knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't care about me, about our marriage. You just wanted to take what was mine. How does that feel, Erica? To be the woman who's responsible for destroying someone else's life?" Erica opened her mouth to respond, but Martha raised a hand, silencing her. She wasn't interested in Erica's excuses. She wasn't interested in Ryan's apologies. She wasn't here for conversation. She was here for a reckoning. "Martha, please," Ryan said, his voice low now, almost pleading. But there was no empathy in his eyes, just guilt and frustration, the kind that came from being caught, from realizing that there were no more lies to tell. "Please," Martha echoed, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "Please, Ryan? Is that all you have to say? After everything? After destroying everything we had?" Her voice shook with the weight of it, but she stood firm. She had come here for this moment. She had come here to make them understand that their betrayal would not go unpunished. Not by her. And so, standing before them both, Martha realized that this was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, about making sure that she would never again be the woman who stood silently by while others dictated the terms of her life. Tonight, everything would change. Martha stood there, her chest heaving with the weight of her words, her breath still sharp with the lingering sting of betrayal. She had said everything she needed to say, every bitter truth that had been festering inside her for months, for years. And yet, as she looked at Ryan and Erica, both stunned, both silent, there was a strange emptiness settling in her chest. The anger that had propelled her into this confrontation seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a hollow space that felt even more unbearable than the pain of the affair itself. In that moment, Martha had expected something, anything. She had hoped that their eyes would fill with guilt, that Ryan would beg for her forgiveness, that Erica would look away in shame. But instead, they both sat frozen, as though the words she had spoken were nothing more than an unwelcome interruption to their evening. Ryan's eyes shifted between her and Erica, as though he didn't quite know how to process the reality of what had just been revealed. Erica, on the other hand, stared at Martha with something cold in her gaze, perhaps indifference, perhaps contempt, but it was clear that she was not afraid, not sorry. There was no shame. There was only an uncomfortable, tangible tension in the air. Martha's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected a reaction. She had expected Ryan to fight for her, to make her feel like their years together had meant something, that the betrayal wasn't a reflection of their whole relationship. But Ryan didn't even look guilty. There was no shame in his eyes, no apology in his voice. Instead, there was only a defensive edge creeping into his posture, his shoulders squared and his hands tight on the edge of the table. "Is this really how you want to do this, Martha?" Ryan's voice was flat, though there was an undercurrent of irritation in it. "Do you think this, coming in here and accusing me, will change anything?" He gestured between them with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We're not kids anymore. You don't get to pretend like this is some kind of high school drama." Martha's breath caught in her throat, the words striking her like a slap.
He didn't understand. How could he not understand?
This wasn't about being dramatic or vindictive. This was about justice. This was about the years of emotional neglect and dishonesty she had endured without ever asking for anything in return. And yet, here he was, dismissing her like she was some hysterical woman who had overreacted. But Martha didn't back down.
No. She was stronger than that now.
She had already made her decision, and she wasn't going to let Ryan's defensiveness erase the truth she had finally spoken out loud. "No," she said, her voice cold. "This isn't drama. This is the truth. and it's something you need to face." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. He didn't seem to care. He wasn't intimidated. Erica, on the other hand, was looking at Martha as though she were some sort of minor inconvenience, a pest who had wandered into their world and now refused to leave. She didn't say anything yet, but the look she gave Martha, half defensive, half apathetic, spoke volumes. Martha's gaze shifted between them both, the harshness of their silence growing unbearable. The confrontation was not going the way she had expected. There was no catharsis here. There was no apology, no moment of vulnerability from Ryan that would allow her to feel the satisfaction of a broken man, begging for forgiveness. There was only the unsettling truth. Ryan didn't regret what he had done. He didn't care that he had ruined their marriage. He had his reasons, whatever they were, and that was enough for him. But Martha wasn't about to let him off the hook. She had made this confrontation happen, and she wasn't leaving until she had gotten what she had come for, until she had made them both see the consequences of their actions. She forced herself to keep her voice steady.
"So, this is it?
This is how it ends? You've been cheating on me for God knows how long, and now you just sit there, pretending it doesn't matter." Ryan's eyes darkened. His expression tightened, a flash of something sharp cutting through the surface of his calm. "You're the one who couldn't see it. You were too busy living in your little bubble to see that we weren't happy anymore." The words stung, but Martha refused to let them get to her. She had heard them before, people using the same tired excuses to justify their selfishness. She had spent months asking herself what she had done wrong, what had gone wrong in their marriage. But now she saw the truth with clarity. Ryan wasn't unhappy because of something she had done. He was unhappy because he had chosen to be. He had made a conscious decision to betray their trust. And Erica. Martha turned to Erica. She had been silent for too long.
Now it was time.
To face the woman who had come between them, the woman who had been so eager to take her place. "And you," Martha said, her voice low and seething with restrained fury. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew exactly what he was to me, and you still went after him. You think I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed?" Erica's lips twitched, but her composure never faltered. She was calm in a way that unnerved Martha, as though she were in control of the situation. The woman who had broken their marriage wasn't even apologetic. Instead, she offered a cool smile. "I don't need your forgiveness, Martha," she said, her tone almost mocking. "You and Ryan were clearly done long before I came into the picture. You were just too blind to see it." Martha felt the heat of her words sear through her, but something inside her snapped. This wasn't what she had come for. This wasn't the closure she had imagined. She had wanted Ryan to fall apart, to see the gravity of what he had done, to apologize. She had wanted Erica to cower, to beg for mercy, to feel the weight of the damage she had caused. But instead, there was nothing. No remorse, no apology, just deflection, excuses, and a sense of superiority in the air that made Martha's skin crawl. She wanted to scream. She wanted to lash out. But all she felt was an overwhelming exhaustion, a deep weariness that settled in her bones. She had won, if that's what you could call it. She had said the words, had exposed the truth. But there was no victory to be found here. No satisfaction. No sense of justice. The hollow weight of the moment left her feeling empty, more broken than before. Ryan's gaze shifted from Erica to Martha, the edge of annoyance creeping into his voice once again. "Look, I don't know what you want from me, Martha. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. But I don't owe you any more explanations. I'm done."
Done.
The word hit her like a physical blow. In one moment, Ryan had dismissed everything they had shared, the years of their marriage, their history, the family they had built together. He was done. And in that moment, Martha realized the painful truth. He had checked out long before this night. This wasn't a confrontation that would lead to any kind of reconciliation. It wasn't a moment that would heal the wounds of the past. It was simply the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. "Fine," Martha said, her voice suddenly cold and brittle, as if all the fire had gone out of her. "I guess we're both done then." There was nothing more to say. Ryan didn't care. Erica didn't care. And Martha felt like a stranger in her own life. She had gotten the confrontation she wanted. She had exposed the affair. She had confronted the people who had destroyed her life. And yet, it wasn't enough. Nothing could ever be enough. There was no justice here. Only the raw, searing truth of what had been lost. Turning away from the table, Martha felt the weight of her own disillusionment pressed down on her. Her body moved mechanically, her mind numb to the world around her. She had come for answers, for closure, but all she had found was emptiness. As she left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool night air, Martha felt like a shell of the person she had been when she walked in. She had won the battle, but at what cost? She had gotten the confrontation she had wanted, but there was no satisfaction, no sense of vindication, only the bitter taste of something lost forever. Her footsteps echoed in the silent street, each one marking a step further away from the person she had been before the affair, before the betrayal. She had gotten what she wanted, but it hadn't been enough. It had never been enough. And as she walked into the night, Martha realized that this was only the beginning of a far darker journey. The police sirens were the first sound that broke through Martha's numbed consciousness. The harsh wail of the siren cut through the quiet of the night like a blade, each passing moment sending a fresh ripple of panic through her chest. It felt as though everything had moved in slow motion since she'd walked away from the restaurant, since she'd made the choice to confront Ryan and Erica, to confront the world that had so carelessly shattered her life. But now, standing in the sterile, white-tiled confines of the interrogation room, time had taken on a different kind of rhythm. It was no longer moving slowly. It was frozen, hanging over her like the weight of an inevitability she had never fully understood until now. Martha sat on the hard metal chair, her hands trembling in her lap, her mind a swirl of fragmented thoughts. She had been in the back of the police car for what felt like hours, the lights of the city flashing by, a blur of colors and shapes that seemed to taunt her with the normalcy she had once known. Her world had shifted in an instant. One moment she had been walking away from the restaurant, her thoughts clouded with the bitter taste of disillusionment. The next, the reality of her actions had come crashing down. Ryan had been dead. Erica had been injured, though not seriously. And Martha? Martha was alone in a cold, indifferent room, trying to process how everything had gone so terribly wrong. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It wasn't supposed to escalate to violence. She had only come for answers, for closure, hadn't she? She had confronted them, sure, but she hadn't intended for anything more. She hadn't meant to strike Ryan. And yet, the way his blood had spilled across the floor in a quick, unstoppable surge had seemed so final. The look on his face had been a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else, something she couldn't name, before he had crumpled in a heap. Her heart twisted at the thought. She had seen it happen in an instant. The fury that had taken hold of her had been so overwhelming, so consuming, that she hadn't even registered the movement of her own body. One moment, she had been standing there, demanding answers. The next, she had grabbed the first object her hand could find, a heavy brass candle holder, and swung it with every ounce of rage she could muster. The sound of his skull meeting the cold, hard metal had echoed in her ears like a dreadful finality, and for a split second, Martha had stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps, watching as Ryan lay still on the floor. Then, as if from a distance, she had heard the sounds of chaos erupting around her. Erica's terrified screams, the scramble of footsteps as people fled the restaurant, the distant hum of phones dialing 911. In the haze of her shock, all Martha could think was that it was too late to take it back. She had made the choice. She had crossed the line. And now there was no going back. As the seconds ticked by, a heaviness settled over her chest. Her thoughts swirled as she tried to piece together what had happened after the initial strike. She remembered standing frozen for what felt like an eternity, her mind fogged with disbelief. And then, someone had come to her, had grabbed her arm and pulled her away, guiding her toward the back exit of the restaurant. It had been a blur after that, an incoherent series of events. The police arriving, her being handcuffed, the ride to the station. The rest was like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had done this. She had killed Ryan. In her mind, she could still see the shock in his eyes, the blood that stained the white tablecloth. She could still hear Erica's voice, high-pitched, panicked, trying to stop her from doing something irreversible. But it had been too late. The damage had been done. Now, sitting in the interrogation room, Martha felt something entirely different than what she had imagined. She had expected guilt. She had expected shame. She had expected to feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her, suffocating her. But there was something else, something that terrified her more than any sense of remorse. There was a coldness, a numbness, almost.